Hello, students. This is the video lecture for Mendich Chapter 2, Part 2. And I just did Part 1, and I took a break and got myself a little smoothie. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Um, I wanted to bring this up because this concept is relevant. Bear with me now. Bear with me now. There is a theory now to describe the way media industries operate, and it's called the long tail. Okay. Before we talk about the long tail, let's talk about the old media market. Okay, this is the blue. Okay, in this graphic right here, the old, we're talking about analog pre-internet media now, uh, is indicated by the blue line. The theory, and again, this is a theory. All the stuff I'm telling you, most of it's a theory. Okay, 20% of the product generated 80% of the revenue. Okay, in the old model, 20% of product generated 80% of the revenue. And we have 20% indicated over here. This is the blue line indicating popularity or sales or how often something is consumed, something like that. For example, if you were in a bookstore and say you were stocking books at a bookstore, if you were stocking books in a bookstore back in the day when you actually had a physical store, people are going to buy the New York Times bestseller, and so the bestsellers uh, are going to bring in most of the revenue right there. 20% of the books in the store or 20% of the inventory is going to generate 80% of the revenue because that's the popular stuff. That's what everyone focuses on. So you're going to focus on that. And if you were selling records back when people actually sold vinyl albums, you're going to stock the bestsellers, the Zeppelin, the Hendrix, the Beatles, whatever the super popular stuff was. The obscure, the niche stuff, you don't have space for in a bookstore or record store. You just didn't have space for it. However, it's the theory. Again, this is a theory. Because of the internet, now we're looking at the red. Now we're looking at the red. This is the new market. You still have some bestsellers. We still have things like, I guess, BTS, Blackpink, they're big, right? You still have the new Marvel movies. We still have these blockbusters. But over here, we're calling this the long tail. This is the niche product, the obscure product, the foreign films that are showing up on Netflix or Hulu or YouTube. Because of inventory no longer being an issue, you don't have to be limited by physical space. You could stock, like if you're a streaming service with movies or music, you can stock and make available all this obscure stuff that you're actually going to get more audience over here on the right side here. This red line is it's called the long tail. You're actually going to get more income or sort of more profit over here because you have so much product. And even if each sort of obscure, weird little thing, Czechoslovakian trap core or, whatever, Norwegian death metal, whatever, even if each of those little small niche genres only has a few people, if you have enough of that obscure product, you're actually going to do more than if you focus in the old world on the blockbusters and the bestsellers. I'm not sure if the long tail is actually true or not because I still think we live in a world in which everyone wants to participate in what's hip, new, trendy, and popular. We call that the bandwagon effect, right? All of my friends, amongst my age group, I'm older than y'all. We've established that. They're all watching Succession, and everyone's raving about Succession. And I actually know a married couple who directed a couple of episodes, Sherry and Bob. So it's like, oh, maybe I should see what Sherry and Bob are up to, and maybe I should be able to participate in the Facebook conversation about Succession. So, I found myself getting drawn into Succession, HBO show. Or, I'm going to go see the new Indiana Jones movie because everyone else is going to see the new Indiana Jones movie. So I think the long tail has some validity, and I think there is access to obscure, niche, weird content. But I still think people like to congregate around the big hits. Um, This graphic right here shows television ratings. We're going to talk extensively about television ratings later in the semester, so don't worry if you don't understand what they mean. But television rating is a percentage of homes that have been tuned into a channel. Decades ago, okay, this is even before my time. I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. The Beverly Hillbillies would get 34% of the country watching. 34%. That's more than a third. More than a third of the country is watching one TV show. Then you have Bonanza, Dick Van Dyke, Lucille Ball. Hit shows today get in the single digits. And it's not that fewer people are watching TV, it's that there's just so much more variety out there. When the Beverly Hillbillies was on, most people only had 3 channels. So it's not surprising that so many people tuned into the Beverly Hillbillies. When you think about it, if there's only 3 channels, yeah, you're probably going to get a third of the audience. But now, a hit show maybe has 4%, 5%, 6% of the audience. The only thing that comes close to getting a good chunk of the audience is really the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl doesn't even break 50% of the public anymore. But this relates to the long tail, because the idea is that we have more and more people watching television, but we're not all watching the same shows. We're spread out everywhere. So this relates to what you're going to read in chapter 2. Chapter 2 also talks about sort of over commercialization and the commercialized world in which we live. And part of that is because the business model of much of the media involves serving advertisers. The media exists to sell your eyeballs to advertisers. That is why the media exists. Media content exists so that the ads have a place to live, right? I've heard people on television, I worked briefly in television, say we create television content so that the commercials don't run into each other. People who work in print, newspapers, or magazines would say we create content so that the ads have a place to go. And it's kind of depressing when you want to think about media content as content, but that's really what it is. That is what it is, because advertisers are the ones who are paying for all of this. And you want the audiences in the right frame of mind to buy your content. The textbook. These are Mindich's words, not mine. These are Mindich's words, that women's magazines want women to feel insecure so they could sell them beauty products. And I think there's something to that. A lot of advertising towards women. I'm paraphrasing what I saw a stand-up comedian say. A lot of advertising to women is, "Girl, you have a problem." Whether it's hair or smell or weight or whatever. But the advertisements for men are, "Dude, you are awesome." Right. If you use this new kind of shaving cream, you're going to get this very attractive young woman. Or if you drive this car, you're going to get this very attractive young woman. But the ads for women are like, "You have a problem. You need to fix it." Men, we, like to tell each other, "You are awesome." I bring this slide up just to repeat and really emphasize this point. The audience is the ultimate commodity. American media industries are devoted to creating, maintaining, and selling an audience to advertisers. And once you create an audience, as long as you can maintain that audience, you can even shift your initial focus. MTV famously started playing music videos. Yes, at one point, MTV played music videos. Once MTV was able to build up enough of an audience and start selling that audience to advertisers, then they shifted to trashy reality programs. I don't even know what's on MTV now. I think it's reality programming. I think that's what they do. But that is totally consistent with the way media industries operate. You could create an audience and then sell that audience. Here is from the textbook. Here are some promises that advertisers like to make to consumers. If you buy something, you'll be loved, right? And you want to buy. You want to have sex with a stranger. Sometimes it's an overt pitch. Sometimes it's just kind of suggested. Go to faraway, luxurious places. And you're going to be happy and be brought to a world of fabulous riches if you just purchase the right thing. And when we talk about a consumerist mentality, that's what we're talking about. This idea that's drilled into our heads from a very, very young age that you can be happy only if you purchase the right thing. And there's always something else to buy. If you're too tired, you probably need a pill to wake you up. If you have too much energy, you can get a pill to make you go to sleep. If you're depressed, a pill will perk you up. If you're a little too perky, you can get a pill that'll bring you down. And I really, really think this consumerist mentality can be vividly seen with the explosion of pharmaceutical ads. I don't understand how all this stuff is legal. I mean, I know it is legal. I know they do the disclaimers, but they talk really, really fast right at the end. But I just think it's odd that companies are allowed to sell products the way that they do, including pharmaceuticals, which can have some pretty serious ramifications. So what I want to talk about now is media literacy. This is the idea that we can educate people, like I'm doing right now, to be more discerning consumers of entertainment. And I may sound like I'm being very critical, like I'm a lefty professor being super critical of capitalist forms of media, but I actually love media. I love comic books. I love science fiction movies. I love trashy sitcoms. I love all this stuff. But I take it with a grain of salt, and I understand why it's created the way that it is, and I don't accept anything that I'm consuming as being gospel truth. Okay, so you need to be aware of the forces behind the media products that you consume, and just think critically about it. Just think critically about everything you're consuming, from news to entertainment. If you see, and this maybe overlaps with other classes you're taking, please forgive me. For some people it doesn't overlap. But I just want to go through this quickly. If you see an unusual news story, you should verify it. I do that. I will do that. I will try to triangulate something. I'll go, that doesn't make sense. Look at the date of stories. Social media sites love to dig up old stories and go beyond the headline. The headline may not even be accurate. You get these clickbait headlines. You're like, I can't believe that. You start to read the story and you're like, that headline is kind of misleading, but it's snappy and it fits, very nicely in 140 characters. Oh, photos can be misidentified. If you see a photo and it doesn't make sense, you could do a reverse image search and find out where it comes from. Places are misidentified. They'll show an image. This is a horrible battle going on in Ukraine. You dig, well, it was actually a different part of Europe 5 years ago. Or some horrific crash that took place in some South American country. You dig deeper, it's not the country they're saying, and it happened 10 years before they said that it did. So take a look at photos. It's recent as of this recording, as of this video lecture. Sam Smith does a stage dive. People didn't catch him. He fell. Whoever posted this is clearly trying to mock Sam Smith, calling him a body positive singer. He's a large fellow. Nothing wrong with that. I'm a large guy myself. That's not Sam Smith. That's not Sam Smith at all. That was a guy dressed as a Ninja Turtle. I don't know why he was dressed as a Ninja Turtle, but that's not Sam Smith at all. But for a good 24 hours, it's made the rounds on social media, misidentified. And here we have the infamous shark on the highway. I don't even know where this image is from, but anytime there's any flooding in any city, anywhere, this image will show up on social media as like, there's sharks on the highway. There's sharks on the highway. And then finally, just use common sense. If a story makes you angry, it was probably designed to make you angry, you know. And if you have any doubt at all about the veracity of a story, don't share it, don't repost it, don't be one of those crazy family members. That might not be true, Mom. So don't be one of those spreaders of false information. Now I want to talk a little bit about propaganda. A little bit about propaganda. We use it as a negative term. It wasn't always a negative term. I mean, literally, it just means to propagate and to spread a message. So there could be positive propaganda, right? If you're spreading the gospel and if you believe firmly in Christianity, then that's a good thing, right? But it has become associated with negative messages, exaggerated messages, falsehoods, and it really, really developed a negative connotation after World War I and World War II, which were horrific, horrific battles. Just horrific. The loss of life is, it's unimaginable if you really start to think about it, especially with World War I. It's just unimaginable. People didn't understand, how could so many people fall for things that were so true, so obviously untrue? How did people fall for things that were so obviously untrue and commit such horrible acts of violence, like trying to do genocide of the Jews? How could people fall for this? They must have been brainwashed by propaganda. So In 1938, this is actually before World War II. This is after World War One. There was something called the Institute of Propaganda Analysis was formed in the United States. The Institute of Propaganda Analysis, and in 1938, they put out this list of techniques, and I'm going to go over these techniques. These were developed decades ago to help people be savvy and be critical and be skeptical of propaganda and see through the false information. I think these techniques still apply and make sense today for helping people become media literate. Okay. And I think that we can learn a lot from our ancestors. And here's one example. I think this list of techniques created in 1938 can really help you understand and be skeptical about current messages right now. There's the name calling technique. You can call someone a commie, a fascist, a pig, a traitor, a terrorist. You don't need to say anything else. If you just say that name, people are going to automatically dislike the person that you're criticizing. Here we have a cartoon. Barack Obama saying, to Mitt Romney, let's have a reasoned debate. And then he says, you got that, you felon. So in the cartoon here, Obama is engaging in name calling. And at the risk of piling on the last president, I mean, many of the things he said are quite relevant to the class. He loved, and he still loves to call people names. He demands respect and wants to say, he is respectable and presidential. But, he loves to call people names. And then someone put this together a few years ago of the different kind of names that he's used to call people rather than engage with a systematic analysis of someone's politics. Just call them nervous, crazy, make some sort of racist comment about their supposed place of origin. That's just, a technique of propaganda, just to call someone a name. You also have glittering generalities. These are sort of phrases that sound good, sound nice. No one wants to argue against them, but they really have no meaning. I think build back better. You could say as an example of a generality, what does better mean? There are many definitions of better: cheaper, more efficient, faster, more environmentally friendly, more equitable. But it's a good term. No one wants to build back worse. No one wants to build back worse. So we're going to build back better. This is just a glittering generality. Euphemism is when you want to cover up the horror or the grotesque reality of something by using a different phrase. I like this image here. Bless your heart is a Southern way of saying you are a dumbass. Another euphemism might be collateral damage. The military does some sort of something in a foreign country, and maybe we end up killing 10, 15 civilians. Well, that's collateral damage. Post-traumatic stress disorder kind of mitigates the horror. They used to call that shell shock. People came back from military conflicts with all these nervous conditions and mental issues. Shell shock sounds pretty bad. There was shells exploding around them. Post-traumatic stress disorder, well, doesn't quite sound so bad. And there's many other examples of euphemisms. Trying to think of one, mechanical malfunction. Well, the plane crashed. The plane crashed. But, if you call it a mechanical malfunction, it doesn't quite sound so bad. So be on the lookout for euphemisms. Transfer is when you are hoping the emotional qualities of one thing are going to be imparted on something else. There used to be all these ads for very rugged, very macho cowboys smoking cigarettes, the Marlboro Man. And individuals might feel like, hey, I'm going to be rugged and individual and a little more in power and control of myself if I smoke the same cigarette as this guy here smokes, right? We call that transfer. A testimonial is when someone who's reputable vouches for something or states that they believe in it. This ad just cracks me up because this actress, I remember when this actress was on Melrose Place, Lisa Rinna, I think that's her name. She's advertising, adult diapers. I think that's what we call them. Is there a euphemism for diapers? undergarments. I don't know what you call them. Anyway, and on one hand, I think it's kind of funny, but I also think it's kind of cool that, she felt comfortable enough in herself and her public image to do a testimonial for adult diapers. And I guess they can be sexy, right? Isn't that what she's trying to show you, that you can still be sexy and wear adult diapers? We have plain folks, the average person, salt of the earth, the man on the street. Dove got a lot of positive praise for this real beauty campaign using unretouched, unphotoshopped images of real women with all their curves. Very, very famous. And I think a really good example of the plain folks technique, but you could see it used in other ways as well. Bandwagon is when you want to stress the size of your following. Like you wanted to stress the size of your crowd, like this many people came out to hear me, or this many people were at the concert. You're trying to stress that, if so many people love me, if so many people like me, clearly I must be the greatest thing out there. Very famous album cover. I remember this when I was a kid. And then we have Fear, the good old Fear. I'm going to look at my notes for this one. This is an example of a propaganda poster from World War I, when the U.S. and England were trying to encourage support for the fight against Germany and the others, the other side in World War I. You want to stress up. You want to play the fear. You want to stress the fear. You want to warn people that some disaster is going to happen if you don't go along with whatever the person is saying. Here's a quote that sort of illustrates the fear technique. The streets of our country are in turmoil. The universities are filled with students rebelling and rioting. Communists are seeking to destroy our country. Russia is threatening us with all her might, and the republic is in danger. Yes, danger from within and without. We need law and order. Without it, our nation cannot survive. That is a quote from Adolf Hitler, 1932, which sounds like something that people might say today. And then whoever was hypothetically saying this today would then say, and only I can save you from this problem. That is a classic example of the fear technique. Fear shows up as a propaganda technique, always in times of war. And another wartime bit of propaganda is, and be aware of this, the enemy always kills babies. The enemy always kills babies. You see this in conflict after conflict after conflict. One side will always accuse the other side of destroying a baby factory, or destroying an orphanage, or destroying a school, or killing children. The other side is evil, and we know they're evil because they're killed children. I think this does happen in war. I'm not saying that children are never killed in war, but it just, to me, seems like a very, very popular propaganda technique to accuse your enemy of killing children. That shows up over and over. Okay, now I have a lot more slides that show examples of propaganda. I think I'm just going to do a video lecture without the questions, without the play posit questions, for those of you who find propaganda interesting. I'm not saying you like it or enjoy it or think it's great, but if from a historical curiosity perspective, if you want to see propaganda posters from World War I and World War II, I'll put that in another video lecture. But this is concluding the video lecture for chapter 2, part 2. And yeah, this is such a great backdrop. I regret not doing the other video lectures from right here. Anyway, all right. That's it.